The Individuals with Disabilities Act, IDEA, requires each state to develop a State Performance Plan Annual Performance Report, known as the SPP-APR, that evaluates the state's efforts to implement the requirements and purposes of the IDEA and describes how the state will improve its special education implementation. The SPP APRs include indicators that measure child and family outcomes and other indicators that measure compliance with the requirements of the IDEA. The indicators in Part B of IDEA fall into three monitoring priority areas. The first is the provision of a free, appropriate public education, known as FAPE, in the least restrictive environment, known as LRE. The second is state exercise of general supervision, including child find, effective monitoring, the use of resolution meetings, mediation, and a system of transition services. The third is disproportionate representation of racial and ethnic groups in special education and related services, to the extent the representation is the result of inappropriate identification. The South Carolina Office of Special Education Services must set targets on the indicators that involve student performance. We have a series of recorded presentations in order to get stakeholder feedback on the proposed targets. Indicator 3 focuses on participation and performance of children with IEPs on statewide assessments, and it has 4 parts that we are measured on. 3A is participation rate for children with IEPs. 3B is proficiency rate for children with IEPs against grade level academic standards. 3C is proficiency rate for children with IEPs against alternate academic achievement standards. And 3D is the gap in proficiency rates for children with IEPs and all students against grade level academic achievement standards. This is a new piece added to the indicator, and it's about how students with disabilities are performing compared to all of their grade level peers. Grades 4, 8, and high school are included in 3D. When we look at this measurement, 3A is the number of children with IEPs participating in an assessment divided by the total number of children with IEPs enrolled during the testing window. The participation rate goal is determined by the United States Education Department, known as USED, and is always set at 95%. So our focus from here forward will be on indicator 3B. So 3B is the number of children with IEPs scoring at or above proficient against grade level academic standards divided by the total number of children with IEPs who received a valid score. Indicator 3 adds a new sub-indicator 3D that measures the gap in performance of students with disabilities compared to all students. For all parts of Indicator 3, school districts, who are also referred to as local education agencies or LEAs, will only be measured on grades 4, 8, and high school instead of all grades. On this slide, you'll see our current ELA achievement rates. This slide shows the targets with the actual results below it for the last couple of years of assessments. It should be noted, though, that the assessment changed between 2015 and 2016, so the targets were then reset when the new assessment started. That's why you see such a difference from the early targets to the later targets. So let's take a look at our current ELA scores with their trend lines. This slide shows the last couple of years of actual performance, which is the solid blue line, and the trend line is the dotted line. Please don't compare the two graphs to each other though, because as you'll notice, the scale on the vertical axis is different on each graph. And then you may also notice that on the left is the graph for 3rd through 8th grade, and the graph on the right is for high school. What the graphs do help to emphasize, though, is that there's an upward trend in elementary and middle school for performance in ELA and a downward trend for performance in ELA in high school. Here are our projected SPP targets for ELA. If you compare them to the old targets, these goals are much more attainable, and we have added a half of a standard deviation from the trend to ensure that they are also still rigorous. On this slide, you can see the targets for math with the actual results below it for the last couple of years of assessments. It should be noted that the assessment changed between 2015 and 2016, just like it did for the ELA assessment, and so the targets were reset when the new assessment started. That's why you see such a difference from the early targets to the later targets. Let's take a look at our current math performance with their trend lines. This slide shows the last couple of years of actual math performance, which is in the solid blue line, and then the dotted line is the trend line. Please don't compare the two graphs to each other. Just as with the ELA, the scale on the vertical axis is different on each graph. And as you'll notice, the graph on the left is for 3rd through 8th grade, and the graph on the right is for high school. What the graphs do help to emphasize, though, is that there's a downward trend in all grades for mathematics. So let's take a look at the projected SPP targets for math. These targets were calculated a little differently than we did for ELA. The targets are based on adding 1 standard deviation from the trend to ensure they are rigorous and attainable. We used 1 standard deviation with math in order to have increasing goals. It's kind of like righting the ship once it's turned the wrong direction.
The academic focus group set 2 goals to support progress toward increasing performance of children with individualized education programs, or IEPs, on statewide ELA assessments. The first academic focus group's goal is that within the 2021-2022 school year, the academic focus group within the Office of Special Education Services, OSIS, will develop and provide information on reading instruction based on the science of reading, known as SOR, to support LEAs in increasing performance of children with IEPs on statewide ELA assessments. To support the first goal, the academic focus group will continue researching the implementation of the science of reading, and secondly, create and compile informative materials to support the implementation of the science of reading. These informative materials will include courses offered through our Learning Management System, or LMS, webinars, and informational guidance. To go along with our first goal of providing informative materials on the implementation of the science of reading, our second goal is to provide virtual professional learning opportunities, PLOs, for writing rigorous IEP reading goals. Both are aimed at supporting LEAs in increasing performance of children with IEPs on statewide ELA assessments. To support the second academic focus group goal, we will create and compile informative materials to support writing rigorous reading IEP goals. These informative materials will include LMS courses, webinars, and informational guidance.